Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladi Akiri Budwale, and Happy New Year 2023. The headlines. Russian President Vladimir Putin devotes New Year's address to rallying the Russian people behind his troops fighting in Ukraine, while Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky only wishes for all Ukrainians victory. And Volodymyr Zelensky says Ukraine's sense of unity contrasts with fear that prevails in Russia. And long-term support is what NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says Ukraine must get. Happy New Year to all our viewers across the world once again. New Year traditions may vary across the world as people ring in 2023. But in some places, such as the Vatican, it was a time to reflect on the life of the late Pope Benedict XVI, who died on Saturday at the age of 95. While the people of Ukraine had nothing to celebrate but held hopes high for peace and an end to the war in their country. For the rest of the world, it was nothing short of fireworks, music, and lots of reveling as they ushered in 2023.
New Year celebrations around the world had plenty displays of fireworks ushering in 2023. In New York, in the United States, the traditional dropping ball countdown took place, as well as midnight kisses, selfies, and lots of music. London brought in the new year with a spectacular display on the River Thames, with the iconic Big Ben counting down to midnight. The London Eye turned blue and yellow in solidarity with Ukraine, as fireworks soar in midnight in the British capital. The celebration, which London's mayor had branded the biggest in Europe, also referenced Queen Elizabeth II, who died in September, and the red and white of England's soccer team.
Celebrating 50 years of pride.
Over in the UAE, the night skies were lit up as people gathered to watch the spectacular fireworks displays on New Year's Eve. An equally elaborate fireworks show was held in the nearby emirate of Ras Al Khaimah, where the sky was illuminated in gold and red. Meanwhile, the Burj Khalifa, the world's highest building, staged a spectacular light and fireworks show on New Year's Eve. Australia was one of the countries to usher in the new year with a typically dazzling display, which for the first time featured a rainbow waterfall off the iconic Harbour Bridge. The show included 7,000 effects that fired from 184 positions on the bridge, with 2,000 fireworks launched from the Sydney Opera House and others launched from pontoons and 4 city rooftops. One million people gathered on the Champs-Élysées Avenue of Paris on Saturday evening to ring in 2023 with a grand fireworks display. Parisians, residents from the region and tourists from nearby and overseas filled the glittering avenue as countdown flashed on the Arc de Triomphe monument, followed by 8 minutes of fireworks. Finally, tens of thousands of revelers celebrated the start of the new year in central Wuhan on Saturday, amid heavy security presence in the city, where the coronavirus pandemic began 3 years ago. Many released balloons into the sky when the clock struck midnight, as is tradition, before grabbing selfies with their friends.
Well, it was celebrations everywhere else. But in Ukraine, the new year was ushered in with a barrage of missiles sent in by the Russians as a new wave of attacks hit Kyiv and other cities. Blasts were heard in and around the capital soon after midnight on New Year's Day, while the emergency services said air raid sirens were wailing across all of the country. With the sirens wailing, some people in Kyiv shouted from their balconies, glory to Ukraine, glory to heroes. Kyiv city and regional officials said on Telegram messaging apps that air defense systems were working. The Kyiv mayor, Vitaly Klitschko, said there had been several blasts in the capital and a hotel had also been damaged. The attacks happened 2 days after Russia carried out one of the largest airstrikes since the start of the war. And Russia's New Year assaults on Ukraine have left 4 people dead and wounded dozens this weekend, as Moscow claimed to have thwarted Kyiv's terror attacks on the homeland. The Ukrainian capital and other cities came under fire from missiles and Iranian-made drones over the weekend, killing 3 people. At least one drone had the Russian words, Happy New Year, scrawled on it in red, according to a picture released by Ukrainian authorities. According to the same authorities, the attack killed 1 person in the southern region of Zaporizhia and wounded another 3. And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Ukraine's unity and sense of purpose contrasts sharply with the fear that prevails throughout Russia. He was speaking during his usual nightly address.
The Russian terrorists entered this year as pathetic as they were. Our defenders have showed on January 1st that they are as great as they were before. These days, it is ultimately clear how far we have moved away, mentally, simply as humans, from what Russia is brewing in. The feeling we all have of unity, of authenticity, life itself, contrasts sharply with the fear that prevails in Russia. They are afraid. You can feel it. And they are right to be afraid, because they will lose. Drones, missiles, everything else will not help them, because we stand united. They are only united by fear, and they won't take away any single year from Ukraine. They will not take away our independence. We will not give them anything.
And on the other hand, Russian President Vladimir Putin devoted his annual New Year's address to rallying the Russian people behind his troops fighting in Ukraine and pledging victory over Ukrainian neo-Nazis and a West supposedly intent on destroying Russia. In a stern and combative recorded video message broadcast on national television, Mr. Putin cast the war, which he calls a special military operation, as a near-existential fight for the future of Russia.
Уважаемые граждане России, дорогие друзья, завершается 2000...
I wholeheartedly wish a Happy New Year to all those involved in a special military operation. Those who are here with me now, those who are on the front line and on the front lines, those who are training in training centers to fight later, those who are in hospitals or who has already returned home after fulfilling their duty. Dear friends, the New Year has been celebrated in our country at all times, even in the worst times. It has always been and will remain a beloved holiday and has a magical gift of bringing out the best in people, multiplying the importance of traditional family values, generosity and trust. The goal of New Year is to make our dear ones happy, to warm them with attention and warmth of heart, and to give them something they dreamt about. Now is the perfect time to put all personal grudges and misunderstandings behind us, to tell your dearest people about your tender feelings, about love, about how important it is to take care of each other, always, at all times. May these heartfelt words and noble feelings give us all the strength of mind, the confidence that together we will overcome all difficulties and keep a country great and independent, that we will go forward and win only for the sake of our families and for the sake of Russia, for the future of our only beloved motherland. Happy New Year, dear friends. Happy New Year 2023.
And going back to President Volodymyr Zelensky, who says that his only wish for all Ukrainians for 2023 was victory and resolved to stay the course while the country fought for it. He reiterated, as he often has since Russia began its invasion of Ukraine in February, that he will stay with his people while they are fighting for freedom.
There are a few minutes left before the new year. I wish one thing to all of us now, the victory. And then this is the main thing. One wish for all Ukrainians. Let this year be the year of return. The return of our people, warriors to their families, captives to their homes, IDPs to their Ukraine, return of our lands, and the temporarily occupied ones will become free forever. Return to normal life, to happy moments without curfew, to earthly joys without air raids. Return of what was stolen from us. The childhood of our children, the peaceful age of our parents. For our cities to be free, our friends to be trusted, and so that in the reports near the figures of 100,000 destroyed enemies, thousands of units of destroyed Russian equipment, the main figure and the main success, 603,628 square kilometers, would appear. The area of independent Ukraine, as it has been since 1991, as it will always be. Let the new year bring all this. We are ready to fight for it. That is why each of us is here. That is why I am here. We are here. You are here. Everyone is here. We are all Ukraine. Glory to Ukraine. Happy New Year.
And outside Russia and Ukraine, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says Western countries must be prepared to provide a long-term support to Ukraine as Russia shows no signs of relenting. Mr. Stoltenberg says that military support would ensure the survival of Ukraine as a sovereign country and force Russia to sit down and negotiate an end to the war. Russia's leaders accuse the West of using Ukraine to destroy their country. Russian missiles and drones have hit Ukraine on New Year's Eve and day. Let's talk now to Olabode Shomi, oil and gas expert who joins us virtually from the Ogun State capital, Abeokuta. Good morning to you. Happy New Year to you, Olabode Shomi.
Good morning and Happy New Year to you as well.
Let's, because in this new year, all the predictions, I have Laddie Williams of our business desk on the set here, and I'll be talking to him in a little bit. All the predictions and all the laser focus is on what is going to happen to the global economy. And everybody's talking about a tougher 2023. And one of the reasons for that is the issue of oil and gas, demand, supply, the price, and the possibility of continued disruptions, who is going to get what, and all of that. Do you think those fears are perhaps overstated? Because in 2022, all the doomsday scenarios that were predicted didn't come to pass. Europe had most of its tanks full of gas in particular, and the oil prices started to come down in spite of OPEC's cut in production. So are we again predicting something that is unlikely to happen?
Well, I don't think it's a case of a doomsday scenario, really. I think what the challenge that has happened is that there hasn't been a lot of deep dive drilling analysis into the issues that happened. I mean, into the details of what happened within the European nations, because they were actually hit. Let us not forget that there were reserves in some of all these countries, and those reserves were used. I mean, and there were cases of like we have a 60-day or 20-day reserve of diesel within some countries. And if those were to actually happen, if they were to run out of diesel, that means they will have issues with their supply chain, getting foods to the market. So, I mean, those were realities that were down on ground, and they are still realities. And that is why certain people who are not part of the propaganda war will always be quick to say, see, look, these are the realities on ground. Let us be clear. It is very possible that predictions do not happen. They are not prophecies. They are basically analysis of situations. And it's on the strength of that some of all these things can happen. So yes, there are doomsday predictions, but they may not happen. But there are still realities that can happen. And we as analysts look at the figures, and based on the figures, we analyze what is possible. So yes, there are realities that can happen.
Let us look at the other side of it now, and that is the question of what it is that can happen. Already, as we enter 2023, there is something that probably was not factored into the analysis, or at least was not factored the way it is unfolding into the analysis, which is China. China is the world's biggest consumer of oil in particular, and China has been buying a lot of Russian oil, just like India has. But when China relaxed its zero COVID policy, many thought that, well, the Chinese economy, which is the second biggest in the world, would come back to life, and with it would come a great deal of demand. That has not quite happened the way that was predicted, because many Chinese are prepared to go out and start everything, but the number of cases within the country and the COVID restrictions that are being introduced by other countries where Chinese are or want to go has also meant that the result isn't quite what was predicted, right?
Yes, I mean, that is true. And that is true economically for any situation, for any country that is coming out of a slow economic growth. So it's not peculiar to Russia. But, and this is a big but, it will grow continually. So there's going to be a period of growth. And with that period of growth is going to come demand. And that demand is going to be powered by energy. So while we are looking at some of the things that have not happened, we also have to look at the hard figures. So China is still to a large extent the production capital of the world, where all our goods are manufactured. To that extent, they're going to need energy to power it. And that energy is going to come from somewhere. Now, it's in the long-term interest of China to support Russia, just as it's in the long-term interest of Russia to support China. Irrespective of whether the demand has been met and whether the capacity of China has grown, the fact of the matter is that the reason Russia is liquid today is largely down to two countries, which is China and India, who have continued to purchase their oil. And when you look at this war, the geopolitics of the war, when you dimension the war along four key areas, along the areas of what is happening on the field, along the areas of the energy crisis, along the areas of who is having the upper hand, you'll be clear to see that it's advantage Russia, advantage Russia, advantage Russia, advantage Russia. So there is significantly limited need, limited push for Russia to change its ways. And as long as Russia is still the number one source, ready source for gas to the EU, it is things for the EU to really look into. So whether this will turn into doomsday, it's a completely different scenario, but the reality is on the ground.
The EU, as you pointed out, is trying other alternatives, even though Russia remains the most ready supplier with the infrastructure in place. But the EU has spent much of the last 6 months at least trying to arrange other alternatives. There are those huge regasification plants that Germany has brought in at considerable cost. There is talk of a pipeline between Spain and the rest of Europe, as well as the UK, and a couple of other infrastructure projects. Some people have said, well, with the willpower, some of those projects can be in place in 2023. For example, the regasification plants. And that once those are in place, Russia may find itself completely dependent on India and China and a couple of other such countries who are currently supporting it, and that Europe would have gotten itself off this dependence on Russia for oil and gas. Do you buy into that scenario?
Those are possible scenarios, but let's also look at let's take a bit of a deeper dive to look into the factors that are there. Well, when you sell a product, it doesn't matter who buys it, at least from the business perspective. If India buys Russia's gas, somebody has bought it. If EU buys Russia's gas, somebody has bought it. I mean, before now, Russia was dependent on the EU to buy their gas. So at the end of the day, really, it doesn't matter whether they are dependent on it, as long as they are able to sell. That is what is important. So as long as Russia can sell its gas, they are cool. Now, with respect to the regasification that is being done within Germany, it is nice, it is good, but we need to understand that the regasification starts to be relevant for LNG, that's the liquefied natural gas. For context, LNG, liquefied natural gas, is only relevant when you are transporting it. You liquefy the gas for transportation purposes. So it is now turned back into gas, which is where the regasification plant comes in. However, there is a significant limitation in the amount of gas that can be transported vis-a-vis the one that can be transported via ship, which if LNG comes in, vis-a-vis the one that comes via pipeline. It is the difference between supplying your garden with water through a hose versus supplying your garden through buckets of water. You can only have so much gas that can enter one ship, one vessel, whereas you have a continuous flow with a pipeline. So irrespective of whatever capacity they have there, they may really not be able to substitute what Russia currently has. It is good for media, it is good for image purposes, it is good to show that the EU is on the forefront, but in reality, in cold, hard fact numbers, it may not actually meet that need. Yes, there's a pipeline from Norway, there's a pipeline from Spain, but the reality is that the gas that is going to pass through that pipeline, how much is there? So some of all these things are the facts on ground. It's not to say that the EU does not have their ducks in a row. I'm sure they know what they are doing. They are key elements of the global world order, and I do not see them really losing out at the end of the day in the whole war. But the reality that is on ground is that there is no yet clear substitute for Russian supply of gas.
Indeed, but as Ladi and his crew on the business desk have been discussing with me almost throughout this conflict, the role of OPEC in all of this, particularly the Middle Eastern countries, the likes of Bahrain, Qatar, the UAE, Oman, and so on, has come into sharp focus. But it seems as if they are operating outside the bounds, some of them anyway, are operating outside the bounds of OPEC. We all saw that huge production cut that OPEC introduced, some say partly at the urging of Russia, which was to shore up prices or take them up. that hasn't quite happened. The prices have remained, short of the $100 for much of the latter part of the year. Is it that OPEC is becoming irrelevant in the scheme of things following this situation that we have on ground? And can we expect that quote and unquote irrelevance will be exacerbated in 2023?
I don't think there's anybody that can say OPEC is relevant or even near relevance. I mean near irrelevant. I mean, people, I think about 40 to 45% of global oil comes from OPEC countries. And it is news anytime OPEC nations are meeting, not because there's anything special to them, it's just because of the influence they carry. So at least in this generation, OPEC will always be relevant. What has happened is that OPEC has been able to identify strategic points with Russia. And unfortunately, the politics within the US was such that, at least within this current administration, was such that it did not go well with the Saudi Arabian government. As a result of that, what we now have is that they are pending towards more of Russia than of the US. The the Saudi Arabian ambassador to the US gave a very strong interview on CNN about Saudi Arabian-US relations and talked about even some of the threats or subtle threats, diplomatic threats that had been made by the US. So I don't see the relationship of OPEC changing very suddenly towards what will be of benefit to the Western nations. Of course, the Western nations do have their powers, they do have their influence, they do have their reach. But as at now, when you look at all the factors that are happening, it still strongly lies within OPEC nations and all that. Because at the end of the day, whether you want to go green or you prefer gas, you're still going to get into your airplane and fly to the US. You are not going to use green energy for that. I'm yet to see anybody who is comfortable flying a plane that uses solar. So there are certain things that must of necessity go with oil and gas. And there are, when you go into the petrochemical field, there are more than 15,000 products that affect our daily lives that are directly products of the oil and gas industry, starting with every plastic that you can imagine, the bitumen on the road, the ink in your pens, the roofing tiles in the houses. I mean, there are just so much that are dependent on oil and gas. So the influence of OPEC is not going to change overnight. I sincerely doubt that. Yes, I mean, there's propaganda, there's world order, there's what you need people to believe. But when you drill down and look into the hard facts, you will know that it is a big challenge that the OPEC and Russia are in alignment for those who their purposes do not align with them.
These are things that we will be returning to as the year 2023 progresses. But for now, it's just there's just enough time for me to wish you a happy New Year 2023 once again. Olabode Showumi. We'll see whether people eventually become comfortable with flying aeroplanes on solar power. That may be one of the options in the year to come. But for now, thank you for your time, and do have a splendid weekend ahead.
Thank you as well. Do have a great day.
All right, let's go from there and talk to Laddie Williams, who's joining me here on set.
Good morning.
Good morning, Laddie. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Are you going to be eventually ever comfortable flying an airplane that runs on solar energy?
I know I know they've been working on some other new technology. It's called fusion.
Right.
That's supposed to be another clean form of energy. It's supposed to use the power of the sun. So, maybe that one.
Yeah, but definitely not the solar one.
Yeah.
I see where your mind is. Now, the global economy, as Olabode Showumi and I were talking about, is facing a tough year in this 2023. And no less than the IMF is saying that. Why?
And you know, we've been getting these projections even in 2022, and
right.
you know, it's easy to see because the headwinds, you know, that we saw in 2022, they've not abated yet. You know, even though 2023 is just starting, and obviously, you know, investors would wish and would want all the problems from 2022 to just disappear, you know, in 2023. But it doesn't work that way. You know, at the end of the day, we still have the Russia-Ukraine war. We still have elevated commodity prices, even though they've, you know, come down from their highs.
Those highs, yeah.
The U.S. dollar is still quite high, you know, at this point, even though it's come down from 114 points. Talking about the DXY, the dollar index. So at the end of the day, the IMF boss is, you know, seeing that the three major economies, talking about the U.S., China, Europe, they're seeing those economies actually slow simultaneously. So she's saying that at the end of the day, if these economies slow at the same time, it's going to impact, you know, other economies globally. And we're seeing what's happening with China. Even though they're relaxing their COVID restrictions, we're seeing cases rise. So that's going to play into 2023. We're seeing the U.S., though, she said the U.S. economy is proving to be more resilient, you know, than most economies. We're still seeing a strong, you know, job market in the U.S. So, you know, that's helping, you know, keep the U.S. from actually entering, you know, a recession.
The big R,
big R, even though we know that the Fed is looking for as much bad news, bad economic news, you know, to see that their rate hikes are actually working.
Yes, indeed, and justified.
And justified. So, you know, looking at all of this and, you know, with what's happening with Europe, we know they still have their energy issues. They're still trying to cap gas prices. We're seeing some of the sellers say, you know what, we don't want, you know, gas prices capped. We've seen, you know, countries like Algeria actually, you know, react to that.
Yes, against that. Yes.
Yeah, so the headwinds are still there for these economies. So, you know, everyone was talking about a recession in 2023. Even though, you know, the doomsday might not come, you know, looking at all the data.
We might come close.
Yeah, we might come close. You know, obviously, it was a tough year, you know, for investors in 2022. You know, investors in risk assets like equities, you know, but those that were, you know, that took positions in oil, you know, grains, commodities, they did well. Those that went into cash also did well, you know, with the U.S. dollar. But, you know, it's not easy to see all these things coming and actually make the move as an investor. So some were still caught, you know, on the side of risk assets. We've seen what happened with Bitcoin, lost over 65%
of its value in 2022.
Yeah, and some stocks in the U.S., you know, the NASDAQ, we've seen, you know, some big stocks there down 50%, 60%. So, you know, investors lost on that front, even though some are still holding, hoping for, you know, better days in 2023. But now we're getting all this gloomy, you know, forecasts. Yeah, so already you're getting scared. You don't know if you should sell what you've been holding or buy the dip or just go into cash. By the end of the day, you don't want to, because you lose when you sell.
That's right.
So it's a lot for investors to actually deal with right now, and
take in.
You know, and taking it. And we're already in 2023 where we are hoping for the best, but the headwinds are still there.
Now, just as the IMF is giving this forecast, you've got the ECB also giving another forecast talking about wage growth this time. That wage growth has got to be capped if we're not going to stoke inflation.
Yeah.
And of course, we do know that the battle for most of 2022 was to tame inflation.
Tame inflation. And
so, again, 2023, we're still going to be talking about inflation.
The battle is still raging on, even though we saw, you know, a deceleration in the later part of 2022. But at the end of the day, inflation is still high. It's still way above, you know, the central banker's target of about 2% per year, which would be great to see again, but it looks really far, you know, seeing how far we've come, you know, with inflation.
Indeed.
You know, but at the end of the day, we know earners, that's workers right now have had to deal with you know, depreciating purchasing power.
I mean,
in 2022.
Take a look at the UK.
Exactly. So we're seeing sky-high inflation. Your wage is not, you know, matching up to the inflation. You're losing purchasing power. And at the end of the day, they're saying they're not going to raise your wage because that will also stoke inflation. So it's a big problem, you know, for the average, you know, worker at this time.
Indeed.
So they're seeing wage growth in Europe actually rising, you know, faster than anticipated. So the ECB governor is saying that, you know what, we need to make sure that wage growth does not play into the inflation we're seeing in Europe, because if that happens, then they have a huge battle, you know, in their hands, because right now we're seeing is energy cost and, you know, all of that raising inflation in the Eurozone. So adding wage growth would actually make it a very difficult battle. So they're saying, you know what, let's see how we can tame, you know, wage growth. You know, we're seeing, you know, resilience with the jobs market. Even in the U.S., we're seeing, you know, there's still high demand.
That's right, for
you
jobs.
know,
I mean,
for workers. And at the end of the day, if that happens, that means the companies are still, you know, doing well, because that means the rate hikes are not, you know, capping demand or crushing demand as it should. So at the end of the day, they have to. The ECB governor is saying, you know what, going into 2023, we have to tame, you know, wage growth to make sure that inflation doesn't grow, you know, at a faster rate, because now they've seen that deceleration. They want, and they've raised rates about 2.5%. You know,
in that interim period, very short, in a very short period.
Short, big, massive, you know, jump for rates. And obviously going into 2023, as inflation still stays high, rates are still going to go up, even though, you know, they have some central bankers giving targets of, okay, we're going to stop at 5%, we're going to stop at 4%. So if it...
Many people would say, you don't know what
exactly.
you're talking about. So let's wait and see.
It's all at the risk of recession. So at the end of the day, the central bankers do have a lot, you know, to do and worry about going into 2023.
The euro, you talked about cash earlier, and the issue of currencies. The only currency that seems to have done exceedingly well consistently has been the dollar, the US dollar. So, but the euro, which is the currency of the third of those that tripod you described earlier, the USA, China, and the EU.
Yes.
The euros has started a bit weak against the dollar.
Yes, it's quite a tepid start to 2023. It was trading about €1.07 to the dollar, and obviously, you know, in 2022 we saw the big parity news.
That's right.
You know that happened, and obviously all markets were rattled, you know, seeing the euro, you know, at parity with the US dollar. It was the first time in about 20 years
that would happen.
That happened. And obviously we've seen the euro gain some ground. And obviously we could also say, because, you know, the US dollar actually somewhat peaked, you know, in 2022 at some point, you know, started pulling all the way down, lost about 10 points. And now we're seeing the euro actually, you know, gain on that ground. And obviously, you know, investors blame the ECB earlier in the year for not, you know, raising rates early enough. So that played into that parity we saw, you know, in 2022. But they've been able to keep up now, 2.5%.
They moved fast. And when they moved fast.
Yeah, they moved really fast. So we've seen the euro actually gain ground, and obviously they're still going to keep moving, you know, in 2023. But, you know, the big question right now is, has the US dollar peaked? That's the question every analyst there is trying to answer, and nobody has the answer yet, because at the end of the day, if it depends on how 2023, you know, starts starts to unravel, we might see investors run to cash again. And if that happens, you see the US dollar, you know, start shooting up. If the Fed, you know, goes more aggressive, you see the US dollar again, you know, start strengthening, and we'll see the whole process again with risk assets being sold off.
And everybody running for safety.
Running for safety. And obviously, you know, investors don't want to see that. Investors are hoping for the, you know, for some kind of, you know, profit, you know, coming into 2023. Even though the NGX, you know, best performing, you know, stock exchange last year, you know, in Africa and, you know, globally, you know, we had the Santa rally, you know, the NGX.
Yeah,
so,
at the very end, after waiting for quite a while.
And crossed, you know, 50,000 points of the all-share index. So the NGX is doing quite well, and analysts are expecting,
that
you know, it will continue, you know, into 2020. But this is obviously an election year, so we have a lot to look out for. You know, talking about the local boss here in Nigeria.
Yeah, we will continue to look out for that. Ladi, thank you so much for the detailed analysis. Ladi and the team will be around, of course, right after this on Business Morning and later on Business Incorporated. Thanks, Ladi.
Thank you.
And when we return, Mayor of Kyiv spends New Year with soldiers in the frontline Bakhmut region. Details in a moment. Please stay on with us. Welcome back. Thanks for staying tuned. Russia and Ukraine have freed more than 200 captured soldiers in the latest prisoner exchange between the two sides in a 10-month-old conflict. Russia's defense ministry said 82 Russian soldiers had been released by Ukraine, while the Ukrainian president's chief of staff, Andriy Yermak, said Russia had handed over 140 Ukrainian service personnel. Some of the 132 Ukrainian men and 8 women who were freed had been wounded or had fought to defend the Black Sea port of Mariupol and on Snake Island, according to Mr. Yermak. The two sides have exchanged hundreds of captured soldiers in several rounds of prisoner exchanges in recent months, despite a complete breakdown in broader diplomatic talks between Moscow and Kyiv. In the sports news, out of this conflict, Russia is expected to contribute around $1.2 million to the World Anti-Doping Agency for 2023, while state funding to the Russian Anti-Doping Agency is set to remain in line with last year's levels, according to its Director General Veronika Loginova. RUSADA remains non-compliant with the World Anti-Doping Code, although sanctions against the country for its state-sponsored doping program came to an end last month. Ms. Loginova, who took over as RUSADA's Director General in December of 2021, told Russia's official state news agency TASS that a decision on payment had still to be made by the relevant authorities. Ms. Loginova said that RUSADA had met its target of taking 11,000 targets for 2022 and insisted that it will continue to do everything within its power to achieve the return of the compliant status as soon as possible. Women's singles tennis world number 5 Aryna Sabalenka has claimed that Wimbledon's ban on Russian and Belarusian players last year changed, quote, nothing. The Belarusian, a semi-finalist at a Grand Slam in 2021, was the highest-ranked women's player impacted by the decision. The Women's Tennis Association and Association of Tennis Professionals tours have allowed Russian and Belarusian players to compete as neutrals since the invasion of Ukraine. British tennis governing body, the Lawn Tennis Association, was fined by both bodies and Wimbledon organizers, the All England Tennis Club, by the WTA. Speaking to Australian newspaper The Age ahead of the Australian Open, Ms. Sabalenka argued that the decision failed to achieve anything and hopes to compete at Wimbledon this year. And finally, on the program, Kyiv Mayor Vitaly Klitschko briefly left the Ukrainian capital to visit Bakhmut as he spent New Year's Eve with soldiers in the eastern city, which is the epicenter of fierce fighting. Heavy fighting persisted around Bakhmut, which has remained in Ukrainian hands for the 10-month period of the war. Gaining control of the city with a pre-war population of 70 to 80,000 people that has shrunk to close to 10,000 could give Russia a stepping stone to advance on two biggest cities, Kramatorsk and Sloviansk. It will also deprive Ukraine of a useful road and rail supply intersection. But with fierce fighting there since August 1 and Russian shelling since May, much of Bakhmut now lies in ruins, while Ukrainian forces to the west have had ample time to build defensive lines nearby to fall back to. That's our program this morning. Thanks for being with us. My name is Ladi Akiridolu. Do have a pleasant time of what's left of the New Year holiday. Good morning.